Good afternoon. Welcome everyone to this afternoon session on the Climate Warehouse. We're joined by an audience here in the room in Barcelona, but I know we also have quite a lot of people dialing in remotely on the Innovate for Climate platform, so everyone is very welcome. We're going to talk about the Climate Warehouse today, and I think it's great that we have a session today because we're at a very exciting phase in the development of the warehouse. We're moving from a couple of years of simulation and prototyping to an operational phase, hopefully towards the end of this year, and we're going to talk about that during the workshop today. And why is it important? Why is the warehouse important? What will that bring? I think we all know in the carbon market world that we need to massively scale investment into mitigation outcomes, into carbon projects, to get close to the goals of the Paris Agreement. But I think we also know that investment like that, to date, has been hindered by some fairly fundamental issues, such as a lack of transparency on topics like supply and demand, but also fragmentation of markets. So markets becoming more fragmented, more complicated, a lack of fungibility and linkages between those markets. And those things hinder investment on the sort of scale that we need. And that's where the Climate Warehouse comes in, and that's why I think it could be so exciting, because I think it could go a long way to solving some of those problems. I think it could become the global data repository on carbon markets. It could become that single source of truth on a lot of activity around the world. And by providing that key piece of infrastructure, I think that will bring harmonization, transparency, and ultimately trust in market mechanisms. And those things combined, hopefully, bring us towards the investment on the scale that we really desperately need. So I think the warehouse, I hope, we're at the start of something really quite special with the Climate Warehouse. And we have an excellent panel of speakers lined up today to provide a lot more detail on the developments to date and where we're going. So we're going to start our session today with a couple of opening remarks from remote participants. So we'll hear first from Bernice van Bronckhorst from the World Bank, and then we'll go to Benedict Chia from Singapore. And both the World Bank and Singapore have been absolutely crucial in getting us to where we are today. We'll then move to a couple of presentations on the stage here in Barcelona. So we'll first hear from Gemma Torres Vives from the World Bank, and then we'll hear from my colleague at AITA, Yeva Steponovichuta. And then we'll conclude the session with some discussion, again with a couple of virtual panelists. So we'll be joined by Lauren Nichols from the American Carbon Registry and from Juan Pedro Serle from the government of Chile. So without further ado, I shall pass over to Bernice, who is joining us from DC. And I hope Bernice is with us. Do we have Bernice? Hi, Bernice.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. That's great.
Okay.
So great. The floor is yours, and please make your opening remarks.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to give a few remarks here. My name is Bernice van Bronckhorst. As you said, I'm the Global Director for Climate Change at the World Bank. I mean, again, I don't need to, of course, remind this audience that climate change is a defining challenge of our time, and really we're just getting the news coming in daily, I would say, at this point, that we are close to tipping points in many of our ecosystems. So the role of carbon pricing or carbon prices is really that they are critical to direct investments to actions to address climate change, and carbon markets will be an important part, as part of efforts to achieve the global temperature goals that the parties agreed to under the Paris Agreement. While the rule book for Article 6 was finalized at COP26 last December, it will, of course, still take time for the detailed rules for the compliance carbon markets to be developed. But what we have seen in the last year is that the voluntary carbon market has experienced really rapid growth, fueled by private sector commitments to manage corporate carbon footprints and align their corporate action to long-term net zero targets. So maintaining the long-term integrity of the voluntary markets is really critical to ensure that it scales up private sector activity and investment for actual climate mitigation actions. So ensuring carbon market integrity with its growth requires the right type of infrastructure. And the idea behind the climate warehouse is really that it can play an important and even key role in ensuring the market's integrity in a connected carbon market. So following successful testing of the prototype for the climate warehouse, the World Bank, the government of Singapore and the International Emissions Trading Association conducted a 6-month consultation between last September and March with over 70 different entities to define the governance structure and the financing model for the operational climate warehouse. The consultation really showed very strong support for a quick operationalization of the climate warehouse, in the context of the Article 6 agreement at COP26, and in this context of a really strong growth in voluntary and, of course, compliance carbon markets. So, in parallel to the consultation, the World Bank has completed the second phase testing and simulation. We are currently implementing the third and final phase of the testing and simulation with Chia blockchain platform to test running the climate warehouse on the public blockchain, which enables wider accessibility with enhanced security and using much less energy and emissions footprint. The World Bank will also provide technical resources and support for establishing an operational climate warehouse system in 2022, so this year still. And the World Bank will work closely with the government of Singapore, with the International Emissions Trading Association and other partners to set up a governance body of the climate warehouse as a global public good to serve the integrity and growth of the carbon markets. So today's workshop will provide an overview of the climate warehouse, in particular an update on the third and final phase of the testing and simulation activities, as well as the governance and financing arrangements as we see them right now. And these presentations will then be followed by a discussion with participants on their views and experience during the testing activities and the governance consultation. So I'm looking forward to hearing the discussion. Really important initiative, and very welcome to the session, and thank you very much for joining. So back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernice, for those opening comments. We'll now pass to Benedict for his opening remarks. And I know it's very late with you in Singapore, Benedict, so thank you for joining. And the floor is yours.
Thanks so much. I was wondering whether can you all hear me clearly?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, that's great. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all. I'm Benedict. I'm from the National Climate Change Secretariat in Singapore. We are part of the Prime Minister's office, and our role is to work with various stakeholders within Singapore and outside Singapore climate key commitments. With the successful conclusion, we anticipate voluntary markets playing a bigger role in cooperative approaches amongst countries. With a diverse group of programs potentially coming on board, the climate warehouse will play a critical role by enhancing transparency and providing the assurance against double counting. This will help enhance the effectiveness and integrity of international carbon markets. Singapore is supportive of the climate warehouse, and we've been working very closely with the World Bank and IETA since 2020 to advance this initiative. We have supported consultations on the governance and financial aspects of the climate warehouse, which was concluded in March earlier this year. We are now working on operationalizing the warehouse by or around COP27 and anchoring it in Singapore. The simulation and testing work supported by Chia Network is a critical part of this phase of work. We will work closely with with interested countries programs and users of the Climate Warehouse to fine-tune the Climate Warehouse and set up the Integrity Council. Given that the Climate Warehouse is a public good, we need to ensure that it has a financial structure that is sustainable beyond the initial phase. We look forward to more organizations stepping forward to support this initiative. As the Climate Warehouse ramps up towards being fully operational, we encourage participants to start thinking about how it can leverage on the warehouse to develop new products and services that could further advance global climate action. The road ahead will be challenging but exciting. I wish everyone a fruitful discussion during this workshop, and I look forward to working closely with all to make this Climate Warehouse a success. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Benedict, for those opening comments. And again, we appreciate you joining us at the very end of your day. It's great to have you online with us here in Barcelona. So we'll now move to our presentations, and I will pass over to Gemma to start us off.
Great, thank you, Simon. Maybe if we could put the PowerPoint. Is it showing? Great. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining. In today's presentation, we're going to take you through the main context and value proposition of the Climate Warehouse. We're going to also give you an overview on the prototype, the testing process and scope, and finally, we will briefly provide an overview on the governance arrangement. So moving forward on the context, the Climate Warehouse sits in the context of the Paris Agreement, which basically provides for countries to pledge their individual commitment through the nationally determined contributions. And by introducing a bottom-up approach, it also offers the possibility for decentralized cooperative approaches to achieve their NDCs. However, in this context, this can also lead to heterogeneous markets, fragmentation, different governance rules, and also operating under different technological systems. At the right side, you can see a visual caption of emerging challenges that were mapped by the Task Force on a Scale-Up Voluntary Carbon Markets. And some of the challenges across the value chain, for example, at the supply level, we have challenges with accounting, at the market mechanism, lack of the centralized registries between voluntary and compliance markets. At the demand level, we have unclear link to NDC. So these are some of the emerging challenges that have been mapped. And so in this context, the Climate Warehouse offers a decentralized information technology approach to connect climate markets. So in the context of the bottom-up ethos of the Paris Agreement and the World Bank role in testing development solutions, the Climate Warehouse initiative was launched with the vision to become a metadata layer where all the data and transfers from registries are reflected through a standardized data model. And through this standardized data model, we can better assess the quality of the data, potentially identify the double counting, enhance the visibility of the corresponding adjustments, and overall, the life cycle of the carbon assets. So let's ask, what is the ecosystem? Where the Climate Warehouse sits in the overall ecosystem of the market? On the left side, you see the data sources for measuring and calculation where the data is captured. Then which goes to the data ecosystem where we see the standard registries, country registries, which they would be uploading the data on the Climate Warehouse, which would serve as a metadata repository for high-level information on projects and units. And then at the right side, you see the data uses that will be for international reporting and so on. Going a bit more, zooming in into the data ecosystem of the Climate Warehouse. If you look at the third arrow that it says metadata layer, this is where the Climate Warehouse sits, all the data surfacing in the platform. At the registry layer, we have the country registries and the standard registries connecting to the Climate Warehouse, uploading data through the common taxonomy that we have been defining for the last 3 years. And then all this data surfaces in the Climate Warehouse in a standardized form, enhancing transparency and reducing fragmentation. And then at the service layer, we have other public and private sector market players that will be able to leverage these standardized data and plug in their own services, such as forecasting, rating, and due diligence. When I'm talking about a common taxonomy, a defined data model that the Climate Warehouse uses, I really wanted to include this slide. It's very granular, but it shows the track changes that we have been doing for the last 3 years in our testing phase. These are all the data requirements that the registry will have to fulfill and fill in once they upload data into the climate warehouse. And the changes that you see have been based on feedback from all our stakeholders, which include countries and standards and broader industry partners that define what were more relevant and clear and what were the necessary fields for this metadata layer. In terms of the architecture, let me take you through a high-level explanation. The Climate Warehouse uses blockchain technology to connect registry systems, to reflect the registry data, and to trace changes that have been made in this registry. So you see at the source registry, those will be uploading data in the Climate Warehouse. There's 3 ways to integrate to the Climate Warehouse. One is through the API, automatically uploading the data. The second one is through the user interface, which is a more manual process, but for other countries that may not have a registry yet and want to mimic the registry functions. And the third one is through an spreadsheet import and export, which also meets the demands for certain countries at this stage and depending on their capacity. And finally, once integration is done, this data surfaces with this common taxonomy on the warehouse. So the Climate Warehouse, if we zoom into the user interface, the user interface has, one is the warehouse view, which is available to everyone as an observer node. It's actually in the climatewarehouse.org if you want to check it out. You can see projects at high level, units, and also the audit history function. So you can see all the track changes made by registries. Then it has the auxiliary application, which is what we call the user interface, which mimics registry functions. So anyone that logs in can have a registry function to upload a project and see how the data model is displayed. Just to give you an overview on the testing and the simulation activities, we started testing 3 years ago. We started with a very quick proof of concept, then we kicked off phase 2, which built the whole user interface, managed the stakeholders and engaged with the critical partners that have been in our journey together, providing feedback on the data model and the infrastructure in general. And then we closed phase 2 in December, and we kicked off phase 3 in March. And the objective is to keep testing until the end of August, where we will be wrapping up the testing phase. Before I move to the objectives and what we have been doing so far in this third and final phase of the testing, I just wanted to give an overview on the results of the previous testing session, testing phase. We were able to participate with 16 registries, the ones that you see on the list, a number of countries and standards, also broader industry partners. And we also had more than 20 organizations as observers. And then in parallel to testing the simulation number 2, we did, together with AIDA and the government of Singapore, arrange the government's consultations that my colleague will be speaking about in a few minutes. And so after gathering a lot of feedback from phase 2 on the data model, we kicked off phase 3 in March. And the main 3 objectives of phase 3 is to continue develop the prototype. This time, the third version of the prototype is different in a number of ways. The first one is fully open source and interoperable, so the code and the installation is fully accessible. The second one is that we're testing on a public blockchain called Chia network. In the past, we have been testing with other technologies such as Ethereum, Hyperledger, and software, blockchain as a software with Kaleido. And this time, we're testing on a public blockchain and updating the data model from the previous simulations. And of course, we're documenting all the technical and functional architecture. And as the next steps, we started the testing phase in March, and we took a phased approach that I'm going to show you in a few minutes on the groups and the participants. And we are now conducting a sprint sessions by feature, by a scenario, to gather all the feedback on the usability, the functionality, and the data model that we're defining, which will be the common taxonomy. And finally, on the governance, we will be explaining a bit more at the end of this technical section. So in terms of the prototype development, it has 2 components. One is the data layer, that we keep defining the data, the taxonomy. We keep testing with our participants to fill in the data requirements and get feedback, whether they can clearly see the life cycle of the carbon asset, whether we're missing any data requirements or any of them are not clear. And the second component is that we have built, together with the Chia network blockchain technology, the blockchain layer to make it to ensure immutability, traceability, and a decentralized governance in a peer-to-peer network. And so I was just discussing about the phased approach of this testing process. We started an internal testing with the World Bank teams, also with our close partner AIDA and Singapore. And once we finalized the internal testing process, we started onboarding and testing with group 2 and 3. As you can see, we're now testing and onboarded all the participants that you see in the second box, and we are gathering very actively feedback from them on a weekly basis. The aim is to finalize with group 2 and then consolidate all the feedback and document all the lessons learned and hand it over to the new entity that will take the Climate Warehouse, which will be very briefly explaining more about this. And so in terms of lessons learned, we got a lot of lessons learned, and we have a little time today, but from all the stakeholders that have been involved in the process, from governments, insisting that this provides enhanced transparency, visibility to their country climate activities. Also, it promotes new project activities. It increases accountability, as we can see all countries, different project level information. For independent standard registries, reduces the burden on monitoring external systems for due diligence process, and so on and so forth. So we had a lot of insights on the value of the Climate Warehouse as a metadata infrastructure required to address the fragmentation in the market and enhance the transparency and the integrity. And finally, we are going to be finalizing the testing phase by the end of August, but again, this scope of testing pushes participants to envision the interconnected ecosystem, to see how they would be adding the data in the Climate Warehouse and how they would bridge the process through the participants. The main benefits that they see, again, is the increased transparency, identifying a common data model, and of course, feedback that we got is how to address the change of legacy, the IT complexity, which is one of the key objectives of the testing, is to address these questions and document it properly for the new governance to be able to move forward. And now, without further ado, I'm going to pass it to my colleague Yeba for the governance.
Thank you, Gemma. Check. Thank you, Gemma. And obviously, a huge thanks for the good partnership that we've had and all the work that the World Bank has done to date. This project did not start last year or this year, for that matter. It's been a long process. And you guys have done a lot of work, and we're very excited to be taking this forward in close partnership. To speak briefly about where AIDA came in, we have been partnering with the World Bank and advising on the Climate Warehouse process in various formats since the start of the project, more or less. But last year, in partnership with the government of Singapore, we carried out a targeted consultation on governance and finance. So really, the idea was to understand where does the market see this going, and to make this operational, how should this be stood up so that it reflects the public good interest and also helps develop the markets of the future. So as you can see, we maintained a very broad stakeholder involvement throughout. We involved more than 70 entities from governments and independent standards, as well as a host of market participants, as well as NGOs, think tanks, lawyers, banks, financial institutions, and other MDBs. And worth mentioning as well that the whole process from the simulation side as well as the governance side was also observed by the UNFCCC Secretariat, so that we're in communication and we're exchanging that information. So we started the consultation by reviewing governance models that exist in the connected carbon markets today. So starting with the Western Climate Initiative, Inc., which is essentially a software provider for the North American linked carbon markets, as well as the emerging model for the ICBCM, veered slightly into the compliance space with the EU-Swiss ETS link, and had some colleagues from Japan share the learnings from standing up the joint crediting mechanism as well. And since we were talking about common data models and really making that consensus applicable to this process, to maintaining that agreement, we also heard from the British Standards Institution and their counterparts in Singapore, Enterprise Singapore, about the international standard development process and how that could be potentially used to help bring legitimacy to the warehouse and to that stakeholder consensus. So in addition to these plenaries that really were aimed to get everybody up to speed and on the same ground, we then moved on to 6 focus groups, which were open forums for all of these stakeholders to discuss in smaller groups questions pertaining to governance and finance aspects that would be more relevant for the warehouse itself. So as you can see, we had good engagement and that smaller group discussions that were really helpful for us when we were teasing out the key questions to be answered and the key missions really that we need to figure out how to make work for everybody. So as I said, we tried to maintain this inclusive process throughout and got a lot of very valuable feedback, which then led to some key recommendations on the governance model and how we should be taking this forward. So back to what Gemma started with, we really got clarity on the priority missions for the warehouse and thus the first things that the governance body should be focusing on. So really coming back to market transparency will be key. In order to make this work for both the public and the private sectors and create this shared knowledge metadata layer, we need to focus on transparency first. That will also help us reduce double counting risks. So if we know what's out there in the market, we are better able to bring in technology to help identify where there might be duplications or any other conflicts and help us resolve it faster, which will be key. And lastly, that service layer that Gemma mentioned in the beginning is also very important. So really, we want to operationalize this quickly, and we want to make it work for the service builders of the future who will take in this data, which we hope will be comprehensive in real time, and build services that could really improve the market as is, and hopefully also other processes. So some key recommendations that came out, obviously we have a really good base that we're starting from. So 3 years of continual feedback on the data model and really what are the key publicly available data fields that all of these programs providing data to the warehouse should have. So that is one of the key deliverables for the warehouse and for the governance model that we assume. They will be next in charge of this. So they will inherit the outcomes from the simulations, but then also think what the best ways are to really solidify those and continuously update them, and that's potentially could be done as an international standard, taking forward all the good feedback that we've had so far. Then the second key lesson was that we don't want the climate warehouse to be a closed club. We want this to be an open metadata repository, which means we want to encourage as wide program participation as possible and get everybody on the same public blockchain so that we have transparency over, as much of what's going on as possible, because really that's where we will start seeing the benefits of the central data repository. To make this happen in the fast-moving space, and we have 2 very fast developing things here, carbon markets never stay still, and we have the blockchain technology. We want to keep this very efficient on the governance side, yet maintain the consolidative aspect, which will enable us to bring on all the stakeholders that we've had contact with, as well as future interested parties, and make sure this works for everybody. So we want to maintain this collaboration that we've had between governments, the VCM standards, and broader carbon market participants. And lastly, on the financial side, this will be a public good. We want this data to enable the markets of the future and help out with provide public services as well. So especially in the beginning, as we're building this up, grants from philanthropic organizations will be key to just make sure that we have that ground to build from. But the consultation recommended that we aim for eventual financial sustainability. So thinking of potential revenue models for the warehouse that could come from enabling that service layer. So really, it all comes back to that consolidative aspect. We want to stay in touch with the markets to make this sustainable and make this useful, a key part of the infrastructure. So from that, we had a couple of lessons on the proposed governance model. So firstly, Coming back to that efficiency aspect, we see this being steered by a very lean council, so no more than 10 members, who'd really take lead on the strategy and policy mandate and key decisions on the direction that this is taking. Would be, of course, supported by the Secretariat. Now we're envisioning that being based in Singapore, as well as supported by 2 committees. So one focused on more technical questions and really getting the expertise needed to confirm the data specifications and any further developments, and another to advise on further IT development and any collaboration that we have with software partners going forward. So that's really where we hope to focus the expertise in developing this forward. And then the second key part would be the user committee, which essentially would be the community consultation forum so that we don't lose touch with the market. So that could also serve potentially as a forum for any consultations and potentially a pool to eventually recruit the council from. And as you can see on the top right, we envision starting with an interim period of about 2 years, so starting next year, and then letting that interim council really decide on how to move this forward and confirming this and hopefully making this a more sustainable governance model going forward. So, and worth mentioning also in the interim period, AITA will be incubating and supporting the Secretariat to help this lift off, and we will eventually hand over to an independent body. So we're starting to develop now. And I'll close off with just a quick overview on this year, because really, incubation or inception phase, whatever you want to call it, we have quite a full work program ahead of us. So as I can see, we've concluded the consultation on governance and finance in the first quarter of this year, alongside with the simulation, with the final phases that are going on. We are currently actively engaging in fundraising, so speaking to foundations and other interested parties who might help us support this. And I won't be providing any details today, but it's been a positive process so far. And we're also talking to the key partners that have been crucial in the simulations as well, so really engaging the data providers to make sure that this will have a strong base to stand on. We're starting to form the interim council, as well as working out the legal and admin bits to really stand up a legal entity so the warehouse is its separate thing. And so we envision the end of Q3, start of Q4 as a big threshold for us. So we expect to launch the warehouse publicly around COP27, not necessarily at COP, because there's a lot going on at COP generally, but around that time frame, as well as with the final versions from the World Bank simulation of the IT will be handed over, and we hope to have the first meetings of both the council and the committees happen this year as well, toward the end of the year. So as you can see, this year is really exciting, and it's been a great partnership so far, and we're very excited about the project. So that's where I'll end, and I'll hand back over to Simon, who has some finalist comments.
Thanks very much, Gemma and Yeva, for that detailed overview, and hopefully that gives everyone a better idea of what the warehouse is, how we've got to where we are today, and where we're going, especially with this slide on the screen. So we'll move now to the discussion part of the session. So if we can bring Lauren and Juan Pedro in on the screen, that would be great. Do we have Lauren on the line? Hi, Lauren, we can see you now. Though I don't think we can hear you. Can you hear us? Yeah, we can't hear you though.
Oh no.
Is that better?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. That's great.
Oh,
That's
great.
Excellent, great that you could be with us. I think we don't have Juan Pedro, but maybe he will join shortly. But Lauren, let's start with ACR. Oh, there's Juan Pedro. Excellent. Let's start with ACR because obviously as a leading independent standard in the market, you've been involved in the testing and simulation of the warehouse for a while, and I think you've just come to the end of the final phase. How have you found that experience? Maybe you could talk about some of the reflections on that participation to date.
Sure, yes. So we've been really pleased to be able to participate in starting in phase 2 through now phase 3 of the testing, including some of the consultations around government and finance that are happening in parallel. And it has been a very rewarding and I think productive process. The just in general, as in line with what's already been said in this conversation already, it's very clear to us how, with the emergence of Article 6 coming along at the same time as this huge uptick and unprecedented growth in the voluntary market, the ability to pull together data from in a comprehensive way is really going to be key here. And so the testing has involved a lot of support from all sides of the people participating. So great opportunities for submitting questions and discussions around what is needed, what the purpose of certain components are, what is maybe not needed that can be stripped out for streamlining the process as well. And we've had the opportunity to provide our insight on how we would imagine using it and considering how some of our stakeholders would be using it as well. So the process of providing that input has been very smooth and supported along the way.
Thanks, Lauren. Let's go to Juan Pedro now, and thanks very much, Juan Pedro, for joining. Can you hear us? It looks like you're frozen. Okay, I think he's dropped out. Juan Pedro, can you hear us? Excellent.
Yes.
Great that you could join us. Welcome. We heard just there from Lauren, obviously from ACR, one of the leading independent standards in the market. It'd be great to now hear from yourself with the sovereign perspective. And I know Chile has been involved in the warehouse for a while. It'd be great to hear from you, though, just to get your perspective on how the climate warehouse may help Chile achieve its climate ambitions and its climate goals.
Super, thank you. I'm sorry to just jump in this session. I was in another I4C webinar as a panelist. So yeah, thank you for inviting me. Well, I mean, the way that the climate warehouse has been constructed and how robust all the process has been, and I guess with our participation in all the simulation exercises, I think the climate warehouse will be a very powerful tool to allow Chile connect its market infrastructure to other markets. So it will showcase projects and credits, potential credit that could be traded with other markets. So that's one thing. The other thing is that given that by law, that we have recently approved a climate change law in Chile, it will be published very soon. And so by law, we have to have a registry which is very similar to the one of the climate warehouse. So it means that we don't have it yet, of course, and we will have, it will pass some time to have that structure in Chile, but I guess by participating early in using the climate warehouse infrastructure, we will, of course, benefit of that exercise, and also that will give us the sense of how things should be done. We have to have that registry that it says in the law, it says that registry should have a lot of functions. One, should track projects, should track methodologies, should track even if there's any trade domestically. This is not a registry to connect internationally, but it should have that possibility, of course. So I guess, as I said, if we're an early user of this climate warehouse infrastructure, then we will benefit because we'll have the chance, as I said at the beginning, to connect projects to potential buyers, for instance, to also understand how we have to develop our own system in terms of providing 100% transparency, access to market players, and all the main characteristics of this tool. So, yeah, and we want to use Article 6, of course, as part of our, climate change package.
Thanks, Juan Pedro. And I wanted to pick you up there a little bit on Article 6, because obviously one of the key attributes of the warehouse is the ability to track mitigation outcomes between systems across borders. So do you see this as being a valuable tool in helping Chile participate in markets under Article 6 in the future?
Absolutely. I mean, connected to the response to your previous question, I guess, I think that the Climate Warehouse is pioneering in terms of, in trying to, put in place the requirements that Article 6 has, recently approved in Glasgow. So I think that the warehouse is built precisely to respond to that transparency need. Because my understanding from the Paris Agreement as a whole, but also Article 6, is that transparency is key. And so all participants, if they're or not interested in market, should have access to that information, because that will be key when, if Chile decides to use Article 6, we will have to report. And by using this type of tools, like the Climate Warehouse, we will expose ourselves, but in a positive way. I mean, it'll show the world that we're doing the things, in the right manner, and so be confident that those credits are, robust enough, and we are applying corresponding adjustment. And what I like the most from the warehouse is that it's using blockchain technology, which is supposed to, ease things in terms of the burden of, the relevant information that the projects, methodologies, and credits should have to show everyone that is interested. So yeah, I mean, it's the interest in the warehouse from the infrastructure perspective, and also for Article 6, I think that they're very related.
Thanks, Juan Pedro. And you spoke there a little bit about transparency, and I wanted to come back to Lauren on this topic. And Gemma presented a slide on the taxonomy, the data model, and how we've developed that within the warehouse. Could you say a few words on how that common taxonomy in the warehouse could help improve some of the transparency, the fragmentation that we see in the markets today?
Sure. I think a couple points to this is, one, there are a lot of efforts and initiatives at the moment, stakeholders who are endeavoring to pull data from the independent registries for analytics, for market assessments, and it's really important that across the board those data are being considered correctly, making sure that the taxonomy of and the definitions behind each of the terms that are being used is understood, so that people doing these types of analyses are comparing apples to apples and putting out meaningful, with assurance, conclusions across the different programs. And so that's one component. And another is just, I think, picking up a little bit on something that Eva mentioned earlier around the governance. It's important. We feel that it's important, and this came up in some earlier discussions during the testing is that as long as the data, the taxonomy is clear and the requirements of how to enter the data is clear and used as intended, it will serve as just the ability for the market to capture everything collectively, not limiting it. You don't want to limit anybody's participation in entering their own data, any programs entering their own data, but it will by default enable an understanding of what is being put forth for transparency and showing up in a central repository without having to place any limitations on qualifications of participation.
Thanks for that. I now want to see if we have any questions from the floor. If you have a question, do please raise your hand. I don't see any hands going up. Okay, so maybe just one final question to both Lauren and Juan Pedro. What challenges do you foresee going forward with the warehouse, either in terms of its operation, getting it set up, or as participants yourself to the warehouse? And maybe we'll go to Juan Pedro first.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, I guess that the warehouse has set up a very high bar in terms of, as I said, infrastructure requirements, IT, etc., etc. That I guess one challenge would be for us to really, reach that level of robustness with the registry that I mentioned that is under the climate change law. So that will be one challenge. And yeah, I guess that's the only one. I mean, because if we don't, as I said, we don't manage to get ours in place soon, of course we will use the climate warehouse. And I must say that we have some opportunities and very good people here that could, really work closely with the climate warehouse people and work, to make our own registry as good as the CW. But I guess that's a challenge. I mean, how to be at the same level of robustness, I guess.
Thanks for that. And Lauren, any perspectives from ACR's point of view?
Yes, a little bit of a similar comment, and just making sure, of course there's going to be a roll-up time and things are going to come online, not all at the same time, and programs are going to participate and plug in as they can, but making sure that the data that's being presented collectively, it's clear that sort of what time scale each has been updated, and making sure that those who are able to connect on an API and can do a more automated data update, is able to be sort of reconciled with another program that might be in the earlier stage of development, and understanding how to present both of those in the same place.
Thanks for that. So we've come to the top of the hour, so I think we're going to bring today's session to a close. I'd like to thank my panelists, Bernice, Benedict, Gemma and Yeva here with me in Barcelona, and Juan Pedro and Lauren on the screen remotely. As we mentioned, and as I think Yeva's slide showed, we are moving from this simulation and testing phase into an operational phase, hopefully towards the end of this year. I think that's going to be very exciting, and we're going to see some real innovation and critical infrastructure in the marketplace emerge. So do keep an eye out for further updates. I think there's going to be a lot happening towards the end of the year, so it should be a very exciting time. But thank you, everyone. We'll wrap up for today.